I thought what we could talk about, because even those of us that consider ourselves litigators, really mostly what we're doing is negotiating and trying to resolve problems. The litigation is a small part of it. Certainly, trial practice is a small part of it, and you could take an entire semester of courses on negotiation. I can't really do it justice in 20 to 30 minutes. But I just wanted to share a couple of things. Some of these you probably all very well know, but they're just good refreshers. And then just a couple of interesting things that I've picked up in reading some books on the topic. So the things that we'll try to talk about are ideas that come from two books. One is Getting to Yes. Most of you see BATNA, you know exactly what we're talking about, but it's a good just refresher. And then some other interesting concepts that come from a book called Never Split the Difference by Christopher Voss. Really interesting stories. He was a negotiator for the FBI, led to being the lead hostage negotiator for the FBI, and now teaches negotiation at, among other places, Harvard Business School. Has a lot of real life experience that he brings um, to his teaching, and I like that. I like when it's not just, the professor is, well read and learned and in all these treatises and books, but you have someone that comes to the table with real life experience. I always find valuable. So, okay, BATNA. It's a good thing to understand. It comes from the book Getting to Yes from Fisher and Uri. And it stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And whether or not we're familiar with this term BATNA or not, we subconsciously come to a BATNA in our mind all the time, right? Whether it's negotiating where to go to dinner with our friend, or negotiating a severance package, or negotiating a hostage deal, what we should be doing. And it takes a lot of preparation and in-depth preparation, right? People, I think, go to mediation sometimes and sort of wing it as opposed to preparing for a hearing or a trial. And I'm not suggesting they require the same amount of preparation, but to have an effective settlement negotiation, you do need to be very well prepared on both the facts and the law and collateral issues. And what you want to go into any kind of negotiating session is with, go into a session with in your mind is, if we don't strike a deal, if we don't leave here with a deal, what is my best alternative? What is the status quo? What are the other options I have? And you really can't effectively or smartly say yay or nay to a quote unquote final offer without having this, right? And often it's not simple. Sometimes it is simple. I got a deal to go here for this amount. I got an investor willing to pay this. I got an investor willing to pay this. Well, also, what is the quality of the investor? What resources does this investor have? I mean, if you watch Shark Tank, you see that all the time. Sometimes someone will make a pitch and actually take a lesser financial deal because of the particular shark and their connection. So you should have all of this information in front of you. And then once you know your BATNA, is this deal better than my BATNA? Is this lesser than my BATNA? And this concept goes to the other things that we'll chat about, which are the difficult tasks very often. And I struggle with it myself. I mean, Curtis saw me getting a little hot and heavy at a mediation we had earlier this week, is to try to take the emotion out of the negotiation and really look at the facts and the circumstances, the BATNA and all that. And it can be really, really challenging, but it's also very, very important. And we'll kind of circle back to that in a little bit. And by the way, while I'll take any questions and we can have whatever kind of spirited discussion you want when I'm done with this pretty short presentation. Just chime in if you have thoughts. I can learn from you just as you can learn from the things I'm saying. This isn't science. This is an art, and you guys all have good ideas. Okay. Hopefully Dominic is not on this call, or Shaliz for this part, and it doesn't just apply to salaries, but this is an interesting concept that there's been a lot of research on it, and Christopher Voss talks about in his book, and it can be used in a lot of different settings, but this is a simple example. the use of ranges rather than numbers. And the example here is you've considered your finances, you considered the job that is in front of you that you'd like to take, and your goal is to start at $110,000 as your annual salary. Rather than even come in and say, I want 125 or whatever number you choose, with the idea that you're giving yourself a little bit of negotiating room, where the likelihood is, not definitely, but the other party may come in with a lower number, right? Maybe it's at the 110 that you want. Maybe it's much lower. You never really know. And maybe you think saying demanding 125 is maybe going to cause some friction. What's shown to be effective through a lot of studies is working in ranges. And in this example, if your goal genuinely is 110, if you give a range of, for example, and this is just all made up, from 120 to 150, there is a good chance the other side will come in on the low end of your range. If they value you and they want to work with you, there's some science behind this. There are studies that very often, as compared to other types of negotiations, you might end up in the lower range of that range, which is clearly acceptable to you. And frankly, in this example, is even a little bit more than what you're asking for. So again, I'm just throwing out some quick concepts for you to think about, see how to incorporate in your personal lives and your professional lives. Give them a try, see how they may work. The use of non-round numbers. I've actually used this successfully in a lot of different areas. As you know, this happens very often in the employment field. Also in the PI industry, we don't do that kind of work, which is people make settlement demands and they're very common, popular round numbers. I want $1 million, $500,000. Very often they're divisible by three, right? They're not really tied to anything at all, right? So I'd say two things here. I'd add a little bit just to the idea of non-round numbers. When I make a demand or an offer, I do like to tie it to something that's real, rather than just throw the number out there. When you receive these numbers, what you think of them, and similarly, you should think about what the recipient is going to feel when you just throw a number out. So one, I do like to the extent possible, give a rough basis. Doesn't have to be to the dollar and cent, but a rough basis for why I'm delivering that number. But it is remarkable how non-round numbers seem to be accepted and appreciated more. And people are more receptive to it. And there's just this, I think, a psychological impact that this number is a little more real. It's tied to something. They thought about this. Whether I like the number or not, it's a real number as opposed to just a throw it out there kind of number. So we'll go to sort of just through a couple ideas. We'll go to like a practical application of this, and the concepts of what we already talked about, taking the emotion out of a negotiation, which is going to be very difficult when we talk about the example. The preparation in knowing as much as you can about your counterpart, and then having empathy, not sympathy, empathy, just putting yourself in the shoes as much as you can of the other party and how important that is. And we'll use a really tough example. So Christopher Voss is talking about negotiating the highest leverage kinds of negotiations, hostage situations, where it literally is life and death. And he talked about how in the early 2000s, I think in 2004, Haiti became like the hostage-taking capital of the world. It like overtook Colombia. And there was a lot of hostage taking, a lot of violence, and most of it was directed at just political upheaval, to basically cause anarchy, attack the system of government in place. And this was causing a lot of disruption, distrust, fear. There was a string of similar looking hostage takings that were going on. And some of the commonalities were people were taken typically on a Monday. It was like hardworking hostages getting to work on Monday. And A lot of these situations were resolved Thursday, Friday, right? Like they took the work week to get this done. And a lot of research was done on this. A lot of intelligence was put into this. And this is what they believed, right? It wasn't proven yet, but they strongly believed that these were not politically motivated hostage takers, kidnappers. These were, dangerous thugs, obviously, that were looking to get money to party during the weekend. There was a strong belief that that's what was going on here. Okay. Now you have all this. You have your family member, female, older female, taken, and a hostage demand is made of $250,000. This is a pretty scary situation to be in, right? So, what was recommended and done by Voss's team was that there was no counter. $250,000 or she dies. I'll just note also, I know I'm jumping all over the place, but that's the nature of this. An interesting thing that he talked about with respect to hostage taking, and these principles should apply to everything else, is that when he got very generalized threats like she's going to die, and that's all, obviously very scary. But when they didn't give the when, how, by what means, the details, the percentages of kidnappers, hostage takers following through on threats is like infinitesimal as compared to when there's details given in the demand. So that's an interesting part of it. So no counter, pretty scary. You're waiting what you're going to hear next from the other side. They dropped to $50,000. The next demand from 250 to no counter, right? We don't like to bid against ourselves. These particular hostage takers apparently like to bid against themselves. They went to $50,000. How does Voss's team with the family respond? Again, this is a scary one. They basically didn't. They said, how can we do that? That was the line that was commonly used. I don't know how we can do that. And then you wait. Very, very scary. The hostage takers went down to $25,000. Okay, they're coming down. Now we're working with numbers that might be manageable. What does Voss's team do? Very, very, first counter now, but very, very aggressive counter. $3,000 counter offer. What does our hostage taking friends that we believe are just looking for weekend party money do? They come back with 10,000. Okay, we're working them down by being really aggressive negotiators in this case. Again, because we believe we know what motivates them. We're using tactical empathy, is what he calls it. Where do we come? So this is the use of round numbers. And there's a few things that are going to come into this. Comes back with $4,751, okay? If the other side is thinking somewhat intelligently, they may get from this is every dollar they can scrap up right now to pay us, right? This is what they got. This isn't a weird number. And, what do we do with this? So what does the other side do? They go to $7,500, okay? So we're down from 250 now to 7,500. We're in a manageable world. What is the next counter to this one? They offered the same amount of money and threw in a portable CD player. And consistent with their research and belief as to what the other side was actually motivated by, the hostage was returned for that amount of money and the portable CD player, right? So, I wouldn't want to be in this situation and test out this type of negotiation, but this is real. And, it's signaled to the other side, who wasn't there for political disruption and anarchy, but just to put some money in their pocket to party, that the other side was really at the end of the road. Not only did they restate that non-round number, but they threw in something that they owned, right? To just try to get this done. It sort of showed motivation on the other side to get it done and also signaled we're kind of at the end of the road, right? So, if these types of approaches are successful in the highest leverage kind of negotiation, there's a good chance that these are things we can incorporate into our negotiating. And it requires, and this is an extreme example of almost every point, it requires really putting your emotion and your fear and all those feelings down and negotiating with logic and purpose